So today we are discussing once again a very important topic. It's a spillover of foreign fake news to Serbian public discourse. My guests today would be Marija Vučić, journalist and editor from KRIK, Crime and Corruption Reporting Network, Igor Novaković, PhD, research director of International and Security Affairs Center, Nikola Burazer, program director, Center for Contemporary Politics and executive editor of European Western Balkans, Stefan Janjić, editor-in-chief of fake news Tragač, tracker, and Mr. Joel Trabai, vice president of International Center of Development and Tradition, an expert on security politics. Welcome and thank you for speaking today. And with us also is Miloš Savin, PhD, head of New Leaders for Stability and Trust, that is organizing the project, the Building Resilience of Gen Z and Millennials. A year ago, I spoke to Marija, Igor, Nikola, and Jolt on this topic, and I would like to first start with exactly that difference that 1 year can make. A lot has happened in the previous year, some very unfortunate events, and I would like to, for each one of you to look back for that year, and when it comes to fake news and when it comes to our resilience to it, how far have we come, and is it gotten any better or worse in the meantime? We can start with Marija, if possible.
Well, a lot of, not substantially, but things changed since we last met here in terms of events. So Corona, when we are talking about fake news, coronavirus is not the focus anymore. It's the war. Mainly, I would say, if I'm talking about some big global events, it's not pandemic anymore. It's definitely a war. But as of our resilience, it's pretty much the same. We are not resilient to fake news, as always, unfortunately.
Mr. Jolt, could you say something about this from your perspective? I can't hear you actually.
Sorry.
Yeah.
A little technical correction. So once again, thank you very much for inviting me for this occasion to discuss the problem with the fake news. And I think that last year, practically, a lot of things happened. A lot of things happened also in our environment. I mean, the war in Ukraine. And indeed, I fully agree that now on the fake news, coronavirus is not so much in the forefront, though recently there were some fake news about Croatia, that the Croatian government is banning the vaccination and so on and so forth. But this is not now the topic number one, obviously, because in the forefront of the attention of people, there are other events. And also, but I think that the most important issue why fake news are there, it is still the same. So practically the motivation of creating and spreading fake news is the same, but the tools have been a little bit more fine-tuned, if you want. So I don't want to run too much ahead, but we can already see, for example, faked internet sites of very credible and well-known international media outlets by Russians. And this is something new that we have to handle.
Nikola, I would like to hear your point of view as well, and later Igor, if he's with us.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't believe that what we have seen in the last year should really be surprising, in the sense that what we have seen in the last year is just a culmination of the phenomenon we have had here in the past several years, meaning pro-Russian propaganda that was dominating the Serbian public sphere and also spilling over to other countries in the region. We knew years ago that this propaganda is there. We knew more or less what the narratives are. We knew more or less what kind of potential impact it might have on the Serbian population in time of a crisis. And this year we just had the crisis. So we had a manifestation of this. We had the consequence of this visible in the public attitudes of the citizens towards the war in Ukraine, towards Russia. And it has, in that sense, had an effect on Serbian politics, a very direct effect on Serbian politics. And we have shown to be not really resilient to this kind of fake news. And there has been a very long buildup to a situation where we are at the moment. So in that sense, this year we have just seen in practice what we have already warned about and talked about in previous years. And yes, absolutely, COVID pandemic has completely disappeared from, let's say, this kind of a fake news media landscape. Now the main topics are, of course, the war in Ukraine and Russia-West relations. And this is where you see the most disinformation. And this is because of a simple reason that this year, the war is the main topic. It is the main thing that attracts attention of everyone. And we have seen even previously, and especially now this year, that when there is a crisis, when there is instability, people tend to, let's say, flock to the internet. They tend to try to find all the information they can. And in that way, they're very, very exposed to fake news. So in that sense, we have just, how would I put it? We have just found justification for being worried about this in previous years.
Igor?
Hello, and thank you for inviting me again to this format. I can just agree with previous speakers about everything, that the situation is completely changed, and COVID was actually, I would say, that COVID pandemics was accelerator. So it pushed things towards more dependency on the internet and spreading of the internet news, of the news on the internet and fake news on the internet. But what is the most important difference is that the things became a bit more naked. I mean that first and foremost, that pro-Russian propaganda became more blunt. There is a certain alignment in between what are the official Russian state media, what they are reporting, and also what is appearing in shady and gray websites and communication channels. And also what is, I would say, a real novelty are the means of communication. So before we had more or less fake news that appeared on the website. The novelty is that Telegram, so the social network, which is a communication channel quite similar to Viber, to WhatsApp, etc., became actually the main driver, I would say, at least in my view, the main driver of disseminating the fake news. So a lot of, for example, in Serbian space, a lot of new groups appeared that are directly linked to the Russian groups in Russia. And we have quite a few new actors there who were previously unknown and still are, to a large extent obscure, that are main disseminators of the fake news. And this is really dangerous because on one hand, there are no more, I would say, these second-hand providers of the fake news. Now the fake news are traveling instantly towards the end consumers through these Telegram channels and groups.
Thank you. So, Stefan, we have all the previous speakers mentioned that, first there was COVID, like the only topic, and now it's a war, like the only topic. Are we really capable of only handling one topic at a certain period of time? And if we are, what is that really saying about us and about our media literacy?
Thank you first of all for the invitation. I would say that we can follow those trends by watching one certain Facebook page. For example, Marija is she was trying to understand the context behind that page. It is established a few years ago as an anti-migrant page called Stop the Migrants, and it has more than 300,000 followers. And by watching that page, we can see that shift from one topic to another. They were established as an anti-migrant page, and then they shifted to 5G, and then they shifted to pandemics, and then they shifted to vaccines. And of course, currently they are really interested in war in Ukraine. I would say that it is something like do-it-yourself package. So they are volunteering. I was asked several times before this war in Ukraine by different journalists from abroad, by different politicians, about the level of Russian influence in Serbian media outlets. And maybe I was naive, but I believe that there's no need for Russian state to put some money in Serbian media outlets, because they see clear financial incentive in publishing pro-Russian propaganda. You have different gimmicks in daily tabloids in Serbia. You can get a poster with Putin or stickers with Putin by buying Informer or Alo or other newspapers. Then you have like specialized health magazines like Russian Doctor or Russian Encyclopedia of Health, etc., etc. But from this point of view, I would say again that we clearly see Russian state is putting a lot of money in different Serbian media outlets, but they also have a lot of volunteers. I would say that those people who believed in disinformation regarding 5G or migrants, they are also prone to believe this kind of disinformation related to war in Ukraine. So it is really simple, really shallow. They are using some simple methods. They don't have to be like experts for Photoshop. They are using simple softwares, I would say Paint, to make some memes, some photos that are showing, for example, that Vladimir Zelensky is pro-Nazi oriented or something like that. And it's really simple and really successful. I would say that that campaign is huge, and we are waiting to see the next huge topic. I really hope that this war will end soon, because but in the same time, I believe that this kind of pro-Russian narrative will be dominant in Serbia, not just mainstream media, but also social network for years in front of us.
Are we really, it's the question for you also, are we really like 100% pro-Russian oriented society, or they're just a very loud minority?
I would say it's a very loud majority. There are some people who are trying to debunk this disinformation. There are people who are trying to offer counter narratives, but I would say that they don't have enough media space, and I would say that the other side is much more aggressive. For example, Marija works for Rasklikavanje, and my team from Fake News Tragač, we are not using emotional language and clickbaits, etc. So the scope of the audience we can reach is much lower than the scope of audience that be reached by Informer or Alo or Kurir. I had an opportunity a few months ago to talk with an editor-in-chief of one huge Serbian tabloid, and he told me that after he decided to stay like impartial during this war in Ukraine, after he decided to give some space, for example, to Ukrainian ambassador in Serbia, to give some stories that are showing suffer of Ukrainians during this war, that he lost a lot of audience, that he lost a lot of revenue. So I would say that the picture is clear. You can be professional, you can show a level of empathy, but then you will not have a lot of people to follow your work, or you will be labeled as someone who works against Serbian and Russian interests.
Thank you. Marija, as Stefan mentioned, and I would like to just continue in that tone, how to stay truthful to all, to journalism as it should be, and to reach more people and wider audience, and to help them actually learn what the news really are?
Well, I believe it's a tough question, because if we had an answer to that question, we would be much more successful than we are in reaching our audience. The problem is that one of I would say the biggest problems here is that our audience, my audience as a fact checker who debunks media articles, my audience and my debunks are written for precisely those people who believe in Russian propaganda. And it would be great if I could reach them and tell them, okay, listen, right-wing person who believes in all sorts of propaganda manipulation regarding vaccines, regarding Russia, etc. This is my debunk, this is what is true or false. But even then, if I manage to reach him or her, even then he or her won't believe anyway. Even then he or her will say it's a BS, you are paid to do this, etc. You're biased, you're selective with your evidence. So I don't believe, despite my wish to get that people, to get that audience to rise, not only my wish, but a wish of all journalists that work their job professionally. We have this desire to raise the level of media literacy, but I don't think it's possible. And I think that every journalist has to face this sad reality at some point of his or her career, that there is no communication between our bubbles, because we have to aim to those moderate audience, I would say, people who are not either here or there, people who are indecisive. We don't have any chance for success if we try to reach this right-wing audiences. So I'm not enthusiastic anymore. I'm not optimistic at all. I'm doing my job, and I'm hoping that some moderate readers will see debunk that we do, and that's it. That's the highest I can score. I can go, and I'm not aiming to this right-wing audience anymore. And you asked Stefan about Russian influence. You tackled this. I would like to say one point, if you allow me. I need a few minutes. There is, of course, I agree with Stefan that we don't need Russian orchestrated propaganda directed from Kremlin, financially supported, etc., because Russian propaganda is our domestic project mainly. However, of course, there's some direct Russian influence in media area here in Serbia. I'm talking about Sputnik. I'm talking about Russia Today, that launched its website recently and has it's planning to launch a TV station or channel in 2024. So it's a kind of direct but very open influence. We know everything about their ownership, their influence, their ideas, and their propaganda, their agenda, I would say. However, there are some websites in Serbia as well as in the rest of the Europe that belong to the same family of, I would say, Kremlin connected websites that spread Russian propaganda. It's not that visible in Serbia. They're not so popular in Serbia. And I believe many of people who are working in a field of fact-checking and propaganda haven't even heard of those websites, the way I haven't heard of them until recently. They're not mainstream. They're not even alternative. They are deeply alternative. You cannot stumble upon them very easily. You can find them if you dig them from Telegram groups, Odyssey channels, and other alternative social media channels in Serbia. However, those websites, even though they're not so influential, because we have our influential machinery, pro-government media, etc., they belong, as I said, to the same family of websites that are very influential in the rest of Europe. I'm talking about Central Europe and Balkan countries. You can even Google few investigations published so far in recent months about direct Russian propaganda, Kremlin-supported propaganda, fueled money and logistic support fueled in those websites who are very, very popular and influential in Central Europe, as I said, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Baltic countries, but as well Germany. So Russia is actually is trying to reach certain very right-wing audience in even the Western Europe. It's not so obvious, it's not so visible in Serbia, because I would say that would be very waste of money and resources for the Russian state, because they don't need to. We already do this job ourselves out of love and Russophilia and ideology, etc. So yes, that's my point.
Yeah, thank you. We mentioned right wing and how strong it is in Serbia, but it seems like it's getting stronger. Like it's not just a Serbian thing; it's getting stronger. That is becoming an issue in Europe in total. Nikola, can you tell us something? Why do you think that right wing is becoming so much stronger, starting from Serbia, but then looking at Europe, like Italy or whatever?
Yeah, well, I would definitely say it's a global phenomenon. It is not specifically related to Serbia or the Western Balkans, and not necessarily connected to Russia, even though Russia is, I would say, one of the main global actors when it comes to helping strengthening these far-right narratives, especially in vulnerable regions, so regions where it is, let's say, easy to do some damage to the Western countries, to the European Union, to NATO. But I would say we have a global phenomenon of right-wing extremism in Western Europe as well, in the United States as well. And the reasons for this, I believe, are much deeper than the current conflict that we right now have between the West and Russia. In a way, they have to do with disappointment with economic development, impoverishment of the middle class in the Western countries. It has to do, of course, with some kind of opposition to what's the mainstream discourse, the mainstream, let's say, values that the Western countries currently stand for. So, and in that sense, we can observe Brexit, we can observe Donald Trump's victory in the United States, we can observe this kind of animosity or hostility towards migration as a part of the one very complex phenomenon that led to the strengthening of right-wing extremists, of right-wing terrorism, even of these right-wing underground groups, etc., etc. So this is a global problem. So we are just somehow, I would say, at the edge of this. We're not really having the same kind of issues as the Western countries have, but we have a spillover effect where basically we import from the West some of these very problematic far-right narratives. And at the same time, we have Russia as an actor which is directly involved in spreading these narratives in the region. But I also agree completely that in Serbia, even if we didn't have any Russian influence whatsoever when it comes to the media, we would still have the pro-Russian narratives because they're a domestic product. They're something that our political elites have an interest in spreading. And if you ask me what is the reason for this, why do we have this phenomenon, I would say that basically it is the Serbian political elites, meaning the government, the pro-government media. They have an interest in showing Serbia in a way allied to Russia, friendly with Russia, because this is what sells, this is what brings support of the voters. And also, I believe that we have in Serbia a very clear agenda of tilting the entire political spectrum to the right, because this is something that benefits the current government. It makes them the only interlocutor the West has in the country, whereas the opposition is more and more turning to the right, so being anti-European, being anti-Western, etc. And I believe this is the agenda. So in that sense, we would have these problems even if there was no Russia, even if there was no Russian influence whatsoever. And as many have pointed out, it's not entirely clear why would Russia even invest heavily in media in Serbia, having in mind that there are people already doing Russia's job here, even without Russian meddling. But the interesting thing is that if you analyze pro-Russian media in Serbia, or let's say media who are spreading pro-Russian propaganda, you can find a very clear difference between them. There are two groups. One are the pro-government media, which I consider to be opportunistically pro-Russian. So they are doing the pro-Russian propaganda because it serves the government. They're primarily concerned with the government's interest. And there's the other group of media, which are more or less some kind of fringe media on the outskirts. They are more or less connected with Russia. They're referencing Sputnik, etc., etc. These media have a genuine pro-Russian stance. And now, while the difference can be not so clear at some point, on occasions, it can be quite clear that whereas these pro-government media are mostly concerned with the government and portraying the government in a positive light, using domestic sources and Russian sources only when it's necessary, these other media are actually directly using Russian sources. They are directly pushing Kremlin's agenda, not necessarily in the interest of the Serbian government. So opening of the RT in Serbia, even though it is seen, at least at the beginning, as something that goes well with the Serbian government's foreign policy and the narrative spread by the government itself, I would say that this kind of development is not really in the interest of the government, because Russia obviously is now more interested in having its own genuine, authentic voice in the country, in the region, independently of all of these opportunistically pro-Russian media, which may turn at some point. If the Serbian government completely makes a foreign policy turn, we can assume that all of these pro-government media are also going to...
Or if the government changes.
Or if the government changes, but let's not be unrealistic. Let's keep it to the realm of reality. We can expect at some point there could be a change in foreign policy of the Serbian government, and in that situation, it would be important for Russia to have its own voice and to basically have the tools to hurt the Serbian government and to pressure it not to make this foreign policy turn.
That will be my next question in the next round of questions. So, I would like to ask Zsolt now, looking from the outside, how is Serbia's media scene perceived?
It's probably a very difficult question for me, because though I'm speaking few words in Serbian, but I'm not really current in it, and I cannot follow really the Serbian media. So I wouldn't be very careful now to analyze the Serbian media from outside, because I have no really direct experience. What I can tell you a little bit more is actually what is the situation outside Serbia, and the situation with fake news and with Russian fake, and going more deeply into the analysis of this. I know that we are mainly talking about Serbian media and its exposure to the fake news and with special regards to the Russian fake news. But I think that knowing a little bit the overall analysis, that would also help to understand what's going on in Serbia, though definitely Serbia is a quite specific audience from that point of view. But I think that what is interesting to see, and we have to know that with all the fake news, first of all, what is the goal of the Russian fake news? Definitely now with the war, this is part of a kind of psychological and information operation. This is for getting support to the Russian narrative and Russian goals with the war against Ukraine. But also at the same time, we should never forget that Russia already since long time, Putin actually, again, we are talking about countries, but I think that we should talk more about governments or people, but decided to reestablish the old Soviet sphere of influence. So with the expressions of the near abroad and so on and so forth. And they would like to discredit the Western governments and Western institutions. And I think that that was quite clearly said by Putin already in an early stage, that he wanted. He said, his philosophy says that the biggest mistake of the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And he wants to reestablish this sphere of influence, and he wants to reestablish a kind of Russian empire. But for doing this, obviously, he needs to find the Western values his goal is also polarizing the societies and increasing, provoking and increasing polarization and provoking issues that are indeed polarizing themselves, the Western societies. Now, it was COVID, vaccinations, the migration, homosexuality, and so on and so forth. So obviously, they are very much working and using psychology as a science, and to understand human psychology when we are informing ourselves. And when I hear you, what's going on in Serbia and how difficult it is to reach out to people who are already convinced about something, they have a certain view on the world, they have a certain view on Western Europe, or especially United States, NATO, European Union. Obviously, those people will always look for news which are confirming what they believe in. Even if those news are totally fake, they will be happy to accept it because that confirms they believe. So it would be very, very difficult to fight those people. Just this morning, I had a conversation with an older lady from my wider family, and she is following this very much pro-Russian media. We had 1 hour conversation, and I was always telling her facts, 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 and she said, yeah. But anyway, no, I think this is everything is lie. The truth is what I heard, what I saw on that side, on that TV channel, and so on and so forth. So indeed, one of the human psychology is that if you have already a viewpoint, you are looking for information and news that are confirming this. And now the new technology, the internet, is actually helping this, because if you realize already yourself, I mean, internet is always sending you news that are confirming your interest and your standpoint. It's very rare that you receive through Facebook, for example, news that are totally against what you expressed already or what you are following already on Facebook. So practically everybody is in a little bull of information, and that's why very difficult to reach out to those people. And obviously, very difficult to fight this propaganda, because they are very fast and they are repetitive. they are very fast, because while Western media is fact-checking, they are already out with the story. Once the story is out, it is very difficult to change the first impression and to turn the story into something which is more realistic. Now, I think that the major issue is that it's very difficult to fight the already existing fake news, but where we should concentrate more probably is to handle their goal, what they want to achieve by those fake news, and rather try to handle the result they want to achieve. Now, I think that also that is something that that in Serbia, people who would like to fight fake news could use quite well. That not necessarily sending out always information. No, that was fake, that was fake, that was fake. But rather to analyze what is the issue, what they wanted to achieve, what kind of reaction they wanted to achieve, and rather to try to develop a proactive communication campaign for counterbalancing their impact.
Yeah, exactly. That is the thing that I wanted to ask Stefan, and we will address that now. When looking at that fake media, fake news spillover, what is the main goal that is behind it?
Well, I would say that it's rarely a direct impact. It's really hard to, it would be really hard for someone to convince me in something that I don't believe at all with just one perfectly shaped disinformation. So if you want some influence, if you want some results, you need a long-term campaign. So I would say that when we are talking about Russian propaganda in Serbia, it is not consisted of some, deeply shaped, interesting stories which are using deep fake technologies, etc. As I said, it's really shallow in terms of text, in terms of images, in terms of video. It's really simple, and you have it all over the place. So you have this kind of content coming from different sites. And what Marija said is really important. I also noticed that we have those small obscure websites that are promoting Russian propaganda, and they are often used in different Facebook pages, Telegram groups, etc., because it gives some sort of legitimacy to those that disinformation. It's not the same if you just publish a Facebook post, or if you publish a message in that group, and if you offer some kind of proof from a certain website, no matter how obscure that website is. So they're using different strategies, and they are trying to keep people who already believe in that kind of discourse, in that kind of narratives, to stay where they are and to be more aggressive. I would say that they are becoming more and more aggressive. We can see that not only in online sphere, but also in our streets. And we are getting some really disturbing news related to different Russian groups these days who are working in Belgrade, hunting Russian liberals in Serbia. So I would say that situation is really hard right now, but it will be even harder in future. I don't see any kind of situation which will put us as a society in a better position. We had some test periods. I would say, for example, when our president announced several times some sort of distance from Russia. He mentioned, for example, the sanctions they supported during the 90s, And then you had like a small change in cover pages of Serbian tabloids, which are always pro-Russian. So I would say that they love Russia, but they love Serbian Progressive Party and Serbian government more. So we have to wait for some moves of Serbian governments and Serbian president in the first place, and then maybe we will see some change in Serbian mainstream media, mainstream tabloids. But in order to see like a general change, I think that it's unrealistic scenario. We have Russian propaganda deeply present in online media, which are more important than mainstream media right now. And I would say, for example, if we take a look at TV station Happy, which has a national coverage, people were worried for years because of reality shows that were like the main program on that TV station, and then they decided to make a complete shift. So they became some kind of TV Balkan info. They have those talk shows with different fringe doctors with different, conspiracy theories. And I would say that it is they are promoting Russia even more, as someone said on Twitter. So it's not something that I noticed, but it is well said that they are promoting Russia even more and more successful than Russian TV in Russia. And it is really frightening. I would really like to have those reality shows back on TV instead of these talk shows right now.
Yeah, Igor, I would like to address one paradox in Serbia. So majority of population is against Serbia entering NATO. Majority of population is against Serbia entering the EU. But also, the majority of population wants to, leave Serbia and search for a better life. But when they're searching for a better life, and when they discuss or when they choose countries to go and search that better life, none of them chooses Russia, or at least like a very small minority chooses Russia, and they choose EU countries. How come?
Well, this is a standard question, I would say. And,
but it's ongoing issue, and it's like, help me understand. Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, it comes from our historic grievances, but also, and to connect it with the topic that we are now currently discussing, it's also a product of the fake news and unrestrained glorification of Russia and demonization of both NATO and the EU. Of course, demonization of NATO is tied to our historic experience, and we have this repetitive information that are coming from various areas of media space, which is huge. I mean, pro-governmental tabloids and others, there are obscure media websites. Then, as I mentioned, now we have these groups. But of course, in terms of practical experience, I mean, the opinion regarding the EU and NATO is formed on more of a sort of ideological level, I would say, and more idealistic level, and it's not really connected with the things that are happening, in the daily lives of the citizens. But then when it comes to where they would like to go, of course, they go with the flow in a sense that they have probably some practical experience with the Western countries. They have relatives who are living there, and in terms of communication, I mean, we are definitely tied to the European space in that sense, person-to-person communication. We can see, and it's quite obvious what is happening there, while about Russia, we do not have that information. And to be honest, I know a few people that went to Russia actually to work, were invited, and their experiences were quite negative. So even in that regard, rare are the people who first go to Russia, and then when they go, many of them who return, they have a bit of negative experience. So here we are talking about the two two levels of thinking. First one is more idealistic and goes into this broader frame of how the opinions are shaped, and the other one is more practical because it has probably in their mind it has nothing to do with this high politics orientation of Serbia, etc., etc. It's about their own personal destinies. I hope that I gave a sufficient answer.
Yeah, thank you. Marija, what is a thing that each of us can do as individuals in order to not become victims of disinformation or fake news, how to call it?
When you say we, you mean we?
Like each one of us to learn. It happens to all of us. I mean, sometimes even I believe in fake news if I don't check. So what can we do not to become victims?
If we want to not become victims,
yeah.
I think that people have to be aware, even people who consider themselves progressive, media literate, smart, intellectual, cautious, etc. I think that people in general, I'm not a psychologist, but I have some psychological insights into this subject. People are more or less prone to believing in I would say fake news, but we are all human beings, and we are all, by default, we are all biased towards our own worldview. And we all, even me, who I'm a fact checker and I work with disinformation, and I know how to recognize disinformation and propaganda, etc. Of course that I have some ideological views. Of course that I'm identifying myself as a progressive, central leftist or whatever. Of course that I'm not like right winger. So I belong to, it's not impossible not to belong to, in this ideological spectrum, not to take some place along the scale. So we are all belong somewhere ideologically. And by default, we are biased more or less, and we are prone to selectively perceive facts that go along with our worldview, and we tend to ignore facts that go against it, that might undermine our ideological worldview, I would say. So this is something we are all in more or less in a risk of being deceived, because we are selectively perceiving reality based on our own point of view. However, the first step is, of course, to be aware of that, and not to take this, I would say, arrogant stance that it cannot happen to me. I'm completely media literate. I'm aware. I'm intellectual, etc. I cannot be ideologically deceived or whatever. Yes, you can. You have to be aware of that, and that is good starting position, rather than believing that you are completely immune to that. So that's always my advice to people, to be cautious, not only to what kind of information you stumble upon and you read and you believe, but to recognize within yourself how you are like selectively choosing this and not that, and how you have emotional reaction when you read something that you don't believe, and what kind of emotional reaction you have when you read something that you do believe, etc. So like observing what's going on inside your head when you're reading information. So of course, I think that this is not like a rocket science, what I said, but I believe that for some people who are intellectually limited or media illiterate, this is a rocket science. But I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to like intelligent people who do care about what they do believe and how they form their attitudes and points of view.
Yeah, but as we agreed on the previous session, more than anything in life, we want to be right. You know, we want to keep in line with what we believe. So I guess that's the issue. Nikola, it seems like the foreign influence is stronger than ever right now, and it is expected from Serbia more than ever to pick its side. And as Stefan mentioned, you can see some shifts sometimes in Serbia media. Like we know it's a pro-Russian, but sometimes you can see that little switch that suggests that maybe that is not the only way for Serbia. How are we doing with that choosing side, and what would be the benefits for us in choosing one or the other?
Well, when we say benefit for us, are we referring to the country? Are we referring to
country, of course, yeah.
Referring to the people in power? That's this different answer, you know, to each.
We can you know, tackle both.
Well, it's becoming increasingly hard for Serbia not to pick sides. It was obviously possible in previous years, despite all the messages that this is not the way forward. It was obviously doable in the sense that Serbia was not really under much pressure to pick a side, impose sanctions on Russia, because, you know, basically ever since the annexation of Crimea, Serbia was expected to align with some restrictive measures against Russia, which it failed to do for the past 8 years. So Serbia was really not under that much pressure, because the whole issue of foreign policy wasn't at the forefront when it comes to the EU relations with Serbia. EU had more pressing concerns. And I would say that because of Serbia's problem with Kosovo, people turned a blind eye to the issue of Serbian connections with Russia and also some other countries which are geopolitical rivals of the European Union and the West. But this year, having in mind the war in Ukraine, having in mind something which looks like a new Cold War, or might even look like a new Cold War, which might become hot at some point, in this situation, Serbia doesn't really, I would say, have much of a space, you know, to, as they say, sit on two chairs and avoid making this clear foreign policy choice. Because Serbia is a country which is, at least theoretically, on its way towards membership in the European Union. Membership in the European Union demands from Serbia to fully align with EU's foreign policy. And in that sense, having in mind the importance of this issue for the European Union and the West in general, I don't think Serbia has much space there. Now, of course, we could see that in the past, how many months was it? 10 months now, almost 10 months since the war began, Serbia did not impose sanctions on Russia and still did not face any major consequences. But of course, we can already say that the lack of opening of new clusters and de facto halt of Serbia's EU accession negotiations is already, I would say, already presents damage to Serbia. And also the image of the country has suffered tremendously in these past several months. And this is going to affect investments. It is going to affect the reputation of the country in a broader sense. This is definitely something that is going to hurt Serbia, especially if we have in mind that we can hear more and more often some demands that Serbia's accession process should be completely halted. And there are even some discussions about also bringing an end to this visa-free regime with the European Union, with the Schengen zone. So all of these things might become really, really a problem for Serbia and for all citizens. It's quite clear that it would be in the interest of the country to turn towards the West, if you could say, or let's say towards the European Union, to align with EU foreign policy. Not only that Serbia is on the path towards EU membership, but the EU is Serbia's most important political partner, the most important economic partner, and that really cannot be changed. That's not even a matter of emotions, that's a matter of a very clear interest. And therefore, the answer to this question is quite clear. Very often we can hear that if Serbia would do that, then there will be a lot of damage to Serbia in terms of its policy on Kosovo. Serbia would lose Russia as an ally in that regard. But I always say as an answer to that, that the most important Serbian allies when it comes to Kosovo are actually the 5 EU non-recognizers. So countries in the EU who are not recognizing Kosovo, they are most important partners of Serbia because they're the ones who actually allow Serbia to have a dialogue with Kosovo about normalization instead of simply being pressured to recognize Kosovo as it would have been the case if all EU member states recognize Kosovo. And yet we had never seen any praises towards Spain or Greece or Cyprus or Romania or Slovakia about their stance on Kosovo, but we continue repeating the importance of Russian support in the UN Security Council. It is important to a degree, but the damage done, if you align yourself with Russia, if you show you're not really willing to share the values and also some of the costs of the European Union in that sense, is going to be an argument for the EU non-recognizers to maybe change their policy. So Serbia can really have a lot of damage if it does not align with the West quite clearly. But of course, people in the government, they have a different calculation because they have a very clear interest in not losing votes. And we know how voters are oriented, at least their voters, we know how they're oriented. And we can imagine what kind of a backlash they could face at home if they would do something like this. In the media, which the government controls, and which have failed in these 10 months to make this kind of a very clear shift, we have seen some signs that maybe grounds are being laid for a foreign policy change. And not only that, there were some headlines that were negative to Putin when he mentioned Kosovo as a precedent for his own actions in Ukraine. That was one occasion, maybe the first occasion ever that these tabloids have actually turned against Putin, you know, basically shown him in a negative light. But we have seen more and more how the entire war is no longer observed as, let's say, a fight in which Russia is right and is fighting for justice, but there's a conflict where nothing is really pure, but there is a lot of damage to everyone, a lot of negative consequences for everyone. And Serbia, as a small country, shouldn't really try to, you know, like, how let's say, to find its own path, but should simply, you know, go along with what the others are doing, because we have to think about our economic survival. So we see that the grounds are being made for this kind of a shift, but unfortunately, that's not going to be a shift based on values in terms of saying how Russia is doing very bad things in Ukraine, and therefore we have to change our policy. It is going to be based, from what we can see in the media, if it happens, it's going to be based on this kind of idea that Serbia is under too much pressure, its economic survival is jeopardized, and therefore Serbia doesn't really have much choice but to align with EU foreign policy. That's negative in the long term in terms of the population's pro-Western orientation, but it's probably going to be something that the government will be able to do without much of a backlash from its own voters.
Stefan, mentioning that shift again, if it happens, like theoretically speaking, that Serbia completely shifts from pro-Russian to more pro-EU, can we like think of what would happen with the voters? Of course, some would be lost, and we know that the government is not really prepared for that. But do they like more love the ruling party, or do they love more the Russia as the brother country and Saint Patron country and savior of Serbia?
Wow, the hardest question for me. Well, I'm not an expert for this question, but I would say that there are some people who deeply love Russia or the idea of Russia. And then you have some people who love Serbian government and Serbian president, especially more than Russia. So I would say that he plays a huge role. The way he explains things, the way he explains the situation. Of course, I don't support him in any sense, but I think that he has a huge power. And if he decides to explain things differently, to change his position, I believe that many people will trust him and they will, you know, slightly change their position. If you have if you want to promote a pro-EU solution, or if you want to make a stance to make a bigger distance towards Russia, I would say that you have different, you can use different narrative strategies, and I'm waiting for Serbian president to use some of them. But from this point of view, it looks like a dream. It looks something that is, you know, so far away that we can of course discuss it, we can think about it, we can fantasize, but it is far from our current situation.
Thank you. Igor, I would like to address one more issue with you, because we're approaching the end of this Zoom conference. Why is the attitude in Serbia towards Russia and China, for example, so much different than, you know, towards the other, like, Western countries? And why is it so much different in Serbia than it is in the all other Western Balkan countries?
Well, how I see these things, first and foremost, I think it's a consequence of 12 or now actually 14 years, 15 years of propaganda coming from the media that are usually state-sponsored, because you have driving these discourses since unilateral proclamation of independence of Kosovo. What we have on the ground is actually quite biased glorification of other partners, and on the other hand, a sort of demonization of the West. Still, you know, what the elite that we had in between 2008 and 2012 in power was, without any doubt, basing their ideology in pro-European agenda, not so much in NATO, but pro-European agenda was there. Here, what we have now in place since 2012 is more or less a sort of relativization of the West and the values and everything that comes from the European Union, although they are our most significant investor, most significant trade partner, etc., etc., and we are surrounded by the West. Still, there is this quite biased presentation of the picture of the West, and plus added to that, you have a lot of fake news and everything that is happening at least since 2015 onwards. What is the reason for that? I would say, while the governments in 2007, from 2007 to 2012, were actually trying to do something vis-a-vis Kosovo. Here we have an elite which was actually prevented to come to power for more than, it was more than 12 years, because precisely because of this pro-European discourse, and with bombing of wider public with the information that are anti-Western, anti-EU, you're actually eliminating the possibility for formation of a significant pro-European domestic power on the political scene. And that is something that I think Nikola already mentioned in the previous rounds of questions, because he said, and now I will paraphrase, is that actually the current government is with these actions is actually making itself the only possible interlocutor to the West. So by decreasing the domestic influence of the EU, it is preventing formation of a strong opposition or a strong movement that would be based on this pro-European agenda, and then they are the only ones who can be partners for cooperation with the West, quite paradoxically. Also, I think that because of our there is a fertile ground because of our historical grievances, first and foremost, and not just grievances, also experiences, because first and foremost, Tito's Yugoslavia was non-aligned, and it was, you know, all the time trying to be somewhere in the middle, trying to balance between the powers, and then so this image of a sort of independence vis-a-vis great imperialist powers, etc., is actually fueling this vision of where Serbia should be now. But then again, there are historical grievances of 1990s. So bombing, what the Bosnia War, etc. All of this is actually forming this basis on which the pro-governmental tabloids and the others are just building. And plus, added to that, as I mentioned, there is a fake news that are, just furthermore distorting the picture.
Okay, Mr. Zsolt, we spoke a year ago, and now we're speaking again. And if we speak in a year from now, at the end of 2023, what do you expect the scene is going to be when it comes to fake news and spreading? And do you see potential for improvement, and are you optimistic that it's going to happen?
That's a very good question. I think that if you want, this information war will increase. But what I also see that the European countries, Western European countries, have started quite complex, taking quite complex measures to protect their societies against fake news. Now, still, it is not very simple, because on one hand, there will be legislative measures, but there is the dilemma how much a Western society can control the information area and can limit the freedom of speech and information, even if this information is a totally fake information. So I believe that there will be more and more thinking in Western Europe how to counterbalance this huge wave of fake news. On the other hand, I believe that the Russians are also living in a dynamic society, and they will respond on those Western protective measures. I hope that our society will be or might be a little bit more educated and more willing to be active when when people are reading news, can be ready to be more active in assessing whether what they were reading was fake or realistic. Now, from this point of view, I'm not very optimistic, because most people are quite lazy to double check. Still, people will continue to love to hear what they think already about the surrounding world. So all information that is confirming their belief will be very much welcome. And probably there is a major issue, the polarization of the society in Western Europe. So I think this is not only an information issue, is not only about fake news, but this is a social issue. This is an issue in the society. If Western societies or other European societies will continue to be more polarized, if certain political forces will have the interest to further polarize our society, that probably that will be a fertile field for spreading further fake news. So let's hope, but I'm not very optimistic.
Marija, Zsolt mentioned that there are societies fighting against fake news, spreading fake news. Do we see it happening here? Is there like any interest of government and to fight fake news?
There is interest of the government to fight fake news when it comes to the disinformation that make them some kind of harm. In those cases, they are very, for example, we had a fake news that the water in Belgrade is somehow contaminated. And this was huge. This made certain panic in Belgrade, and they were very prompt and proactive in debunking that. So every time something happens that the government finds important to tackle, they are going to tackle it very quickly. But in majority of cases, they are not going to do anything. I mean, we see that this propaganda machinery, tabloids, TV stations, etc., are spreading fake news and propaganda every day, and no one is going to debunk that or ask them to be more professional or whatever. I mean, it wouldn't be a job of the government to regulate the media, of course. However, this is something that that is very good for them as well. So they're not going to do anything about that. So yes, the government and their media, pro-government media, are on one side of history, the bad one, and they're not going to do anything. But of course, we have some other stakeholders, I would say, some other actors who are fighting disinformation. I'm talking about fact-checking organizations that are very limited with their reach and influence. But of course, it's a problem for journalism, for good journalism, professional journalism, investigative journalism in Serbia and Western Balkans. It has very limited reach, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have to exist.
Stefan, are you optimistic that this can change?
No, no. We're working for fact-checking websites, so I would say that very often I have to be like a PR of my own website. But I would say that what we can do as fact-checkers is not enough. We don't have enough support. We don't have enough interest. Our analysis often comes as reaction days after certain disinformation reached its huge viral potential with hundreds of and thousands of shares and likes and comments, etc. So I think that we need that we generally need different approach, and we can do it by media literacy. It is getting a part of school curricula, and we are working with teachers. We're working with professors from Serbia, but I would say that very often they themselves lack a level of media literacy, and I'm a little bit worried how are they really right persons to explain the concept of media literacy to someone. Very often they are not interested in that topic. They're just they're missing some classes in their working sheet, so they are getting this subject, but they are afraid, for example, of new technology. They are really afraid when then they have to talk with children, with their pupils regarding Instagram or TikTok. They are trying to stay aside. They are trying to they are trying to avoid those very important topics. So for general change, we need some kind of new perspective. It's not something that can be reached next year or in 5 years. We need a lot of time, but I'm afraid that we are going in the wrong direction generally.
Thank you. And one final question for Nikola. It is pretty much the same one that I asked Zsolt, and that is in a year from now, but this is like specifically for Serbia. Where do you see Serbia? Do you see any improvement?
I would say that our government is usually very hard to basically have any prognosis for the year ahead. But I would say that if the war in Ukraine continues, if it's no miraculous solution to the war, and if the sanctions stay in place, I believe that step by step, little by little, Serbia would align itself, at least with some of the sanctions against Russia. but that's not going to be a clean foreign policy turn if it happens. And it is going to be followed probably by an even strengthened disinformation coming from Moscow and the media aligned with Moscow and its interests. So I believe that's going to be a division in society next year, as well as it was this year. And now, whether this is all going to end with some kind of actions to prevent this Kremlin influence, or it's not going to actually be successful, that's something it's very hard to assess. But the divisions in society about this question are quite deep. Disinformation has become not only a phenomenon when it comes to foreign policy or foreign actors, it's a way how politics are done in Serbia. So this is not something that's going to disappear overnight. The media literacy is a huge problem. It cannot be resolved overnight. The media who are spreading information for different reasons, for different interests, are not going to change their way of functioning overnight. So we're going to continue fighting pretty much the same fight, maybe in a bit different political circumstances, but this was, is, and will remain a huge problem for Serbian democracy in the future. And I agree 100% that it is hard to fight disinformation just with fact-checking. It is hard to fight it in this guerrilla manner, almost in a way where all of us are somehow trying to counter these narratives, either by debunking or by providing some kind of alternative information, because it's a systemic problem. The state needs to have enough political will to do something about it. But the problem is that the political will seems to be completely absent. And this is going to remain maybe the biggest problem we face.
I want to thank you all for participating today, and I hope that we will see each other in a year in person, not via Zoom, next year, and that we will be much more optimistic that we are today, and that situation is going to be much better. Thank you all.
Thank you.